Hello, I'm your instructor, Bernard Norcott-Mahany, and we are moving on to the last two chapters, chapter 11 and 12, on Greek heroines and quest heroes. The history. So, Maurizio gives the same schema for heroines as she does to heroes. In other words, that they die, there's a shrine to them, they do extraordinary things, that sort of thing. That's fine, but I don't think that really gets you anywhere. I mean, it's sort of like, yeah, okay, that's true, but so what? The way of looking at the heroine that I like the best was used in a textbook that I used to use for Greek myth, but because of cost and because the size of the book was quite a bit bigger, which made it like impossible to even do a third of the book in a short-term class, is why I don't use it. But this was by Harris and Platzner. They looked at the heroine and they said there are basically 5 different ways that a heroine can be a heroine. One is to be the wife or the mother of the hero, and that's the most common. So Andromache is the wife of Hector, and so her status really comes from the fact that she is married to the greatest of the Trojan warriors in the Trojan War. She does have some adventures on her own after Hector's death, but she still gets her sort of her status from being the wife of Hector. Could be the mother of a hero. So Hecuba, the mother of Hector, would be one of those. Also Alcmena, the mother of Hercules, would be another. And they get their status primarily for giving birth to a hero. The helper to the hero could be a figure like Andromache, could be a figure like Electra, who helps her brother Orestes get revenge against Clytemnestra. It could also be Medea in her early days when she helps Jason. So the hero Ariadne, who helps Theseus defeat the Minotaur, those would all be helpers to heroes. The hero impersonator is a heroine who basically does the sort of thing that, were it a man, would be sort of praised, but because a woman does it, it's generally seen as something awful. So Lady Macbeth is a good example of that in just world literature generally, but within the stuff we have, we've got the figure of Clytemnestra, who kills her husband Agamemnon and basically rules in his stead, both before she kills him, while he's away at Troy, but also when he comes home, she sort of holds on to the power. And Medea in the play Medea is a hero impersonator. She's doing she's acting a lot like Achilles, right? She's upset at being insulted by Jason, and she's determined to get revenge, and she gets revenge. The Bride of Death is a young woman who gives up her life before she gets married. Antigone is one such figure. Iphigenia is another such figure. They die before they get married. And the victorious heroine, Harris and Platzner are sort of mushy on this. They don't do it so well. But in a sense, these are heroines who I think abide by the gender roles of the society and yet still get to sort of dictate their lives in their own terms. So they're not hero impersonators. They're not, quote unquote, acting like a man. But Penelope, the wife of Odysseus, is the best example of that. So continuing here, the figure of Camilla, of Charilla. So Charilla was a young woman, like a girl, maybe 8 years old, 9 years old, and the people in the area around Delphi were having a festival, and the king was giving out food. But she was basically like a poor beggar girl. I think she was an orphan from the sound of it. And she went, asking for food, sort of like Oliver Twist in the Dickens novel, right? Please, sir, can I have some more? The king saw this as an affront. He took his shoe and hit her, slapped her with it. She was horrified and ashamed. She ran away, and then she hanged herself. But then bad things happened in Delphi, and when they consulted the oracle said, you need to build a shrine to Kyrilla, and basically keep her angry spirit at bay, because the girl is angry at having died so young. Now, that's a similar thing to what happened with Cleomenes, right? In this case, Kyrilla didn't do anything, great on her own, but she was very much a figure who valued life, and when she was insulted, she couldn't sort of take that, so she committed suicide. But then she's angry about all of that, and then her ghost can take revenge. So that shows the sort of the power. The literary selection in the book comes from Euripides' play Medea, which was performed in 431 BCE. Euripides came in third place that time, so he basically lost in the competition. The scene that we have is primarily the agon, the debate scene from the play. Now, this thing here, Euripides' disdain for sophists. Euripides, during Euripides' life, there was the rise of the sophists. The sophists were professional rhetoric teachers. They taught people how to make speeches. Now, in a democracy, knowing how to make a good speech means that you're going to get what you want done, right? That's how you have to do it. You have to convince people, because it's a democracy, right? Everyone gets a vote. So if you don't convince the majority of people, you don't get what you want. So it's important. But Euripides and Plato both saw the sophists as basically teaching people how to lie well. And so they had a great disdain for the sophists. Now, Euripides, has a debate scene, an agon, which just means a contest. But he has a debate scene in almost every one of his plays. We have 19 plays, and of those 19, I think maybe 14 or so have a debate scene in them. There's usually one side that's a clear winner, the other side is the clear loser. And I think for Euripides, what determines a winner is who has facts on their side. Okay, you can talk as pretty as you want, but if you're basically lying, that doesn't mean anything, right, for Euripides. So in this debate, I think it's clear which one is speaking more honestly and which one is probably shaving the truth, if not outright lying. So that's the thing to look out in that scene. Now, the scholarship for chapter 11 looks at a hero scheme. This is from a man named Lord Raglan. So in the 30s, he wrote a book called The Hero, A Study in Tradition, Myth, and Drama. And what he found was that there were 22 elements that occurred in the hero story. So the hero was of royal birth. The hero, there might be a god in the hero's background. I mean, so there were certain things that you could count on most of the time for the hero. In this little selection, Marianne Jezewski takes Lord Raglan's scheme, looks at it, and sees which of them could be applied to female heroes, to heroines, and she says that there are 18 of Lord Raglan's, maybe with a little bit of change on some of them, that apply to the heroines. And you can see that list, and you can think about how that actually applies to Medea or to some other figures. The comparison to other works in the Mediterranean is they look at how Medea is presented in Latin literature in Rome. The Roman poet Ovid, Publius Ovidius Naso, had two works in which Medea figures. The Heroides is a collection of 20-some letters by famous mythological women to their lovers or husbands, in the case. So we've got like a letter from Penelope to Odysseus, and there's a letter from Medea to Jason. This basically presents Medea as just a lovesick person who's jealous and angry. It doesn't really show her as a powerful figure. She's basically just a desperate woman in that letter. She also appears in the Metamorphoses of Ovid, which is an epic poem that deals with mythological changes. And it's basically a history of the world from creation up to Ovid's own day, looking at famous instances of where someone was transformed into something. So you get the Daphne story, Daphne is turned into a laurel tree. Or the Arachne story, Arachne is turned into a spider. Right? It's basically the greatest collection of mythological tales we have is the Metamorphoses. Ovid in the Metamorphoses does treat of Medea, but it's interesting that he largely skips what happens in Corinth, which is what the play is about. Rather, he focuses on what happens before Corinth and then what happens after Corinth. And I think part of that might be that Ovid himself wrote a play about Medea. And the ancients say it was the best thing he ever wrote. It doesn't survive, which is really surprising because we have a lot of Ovid. We have almost everything Ovid wrote, but we don't have the work that the ancients apparently thought was his best work. So it's puzzling. But my guess is that dealt with Medea and Corinth, so he basically skips that in the Metamorphoses. Lucius Annaeus Seneca, who was a philosopher, but he was also like a cabinet member for Nero. He also wrote a play called Medea. And for Seneca, the key thing with Medea, his Medea is largely a rendition of Euripides' play. It follows Euripides pretty closely. It's not a translation, but it follows it pretty closely. His difference is Medea for Seneca is clearly in the wrong, as opposed to in Euripides' play, where Euripides, I think, does his best to make us sympathetic to Medea. We're sort of on her side, and then he really pushes the envelope because when she kills her kids, we're like horrified, right? So it's sort of like, oh, that poor woman, that poor woman, that poor woman, and then she kills her kids, and it's like, what the hell? Right, that happens in Euripides. In Seneca's version, I think she is always cast as the outsider, and she's, for Seneca, who is a Stoic philosopher, that was his school of philosophy, he was a Stoic. The Stoics believed that you had to keep your emotions in check, right? If the most famous Stoic that I know of in popular culture would be Spock, right? The Vulcans are basically living a Stoic life. Keeping your emotions in check is key. You have the emotions, but you can't let them come out. And so Medea is a sort of slave to her emotions the way Seneca presents it. And that makes her dangerous. The Nachleben section looks at a historical figure, a slave, a runaway slave named Margaret Garner, or Peggy Garner. She ran away. She was caught by slave catchers near Cincinnati, Ohio, so in southern Ohio. So she crossed from Kentucky into Ohio. So technically she's in a free state, but they did have these slave catchers who would track slaves down, and they did. They found her, and she killed her daughter. This is in 1856, and then she attempted to kill her sons, but the slave catchers got to her first and prevented her from doing that. Now, she, of course, ended up being caught. Her mother-in-law, so the grandmother of the children, does not seem to have blamed Peggy Garner for what she did. So that's a rather telling thing. Now, she was compared in the press of the day to Medea. Why? Because she's this woman who tried to kill her kids. She's also an outsider based on the view of the society at the time, right? A slave is outside the civilized society, just like Medea is outside civilized Greek society. So you can see where they get that. Of course, her reason for killing her daughter was likely she was probably raped by the master that produced the kids. So the kids were probably the master's children, but they were, because they came out of her, they would then be enslaved. They would not be freeborn kids that the master would recognize. That would mean for her daughter that her daughter, when she came of age, would also likely get raped. Right? The likelihood is that's what would happen. And so it seems like Peggy Garner actually killed her daughter to save her from that. And the story of Peggy Garner is fictionalized in a book by Toni Morrison called Beloved, where this woman who had to kill her children, she was escaping from slavery. She had to kill her children, and she's haunted by the ghost of her daughter, who is beloved, right? So the ghost sort of haunts. And that book by Toni Morrison, the woman has to come to terms with that, with her action. And in a sense, accept the ghost of her daughter, right? So rather than see it as some sort of awful thing that's following her, just see it as sort of part of her life. I mean, it's a great novel. I heartily recommend it. The movie based on it is okay, but the book is actually really, really special. Now moving on to chapter 12, which is about quest heroes. So the quest heroes would include Odysseus, who travels for 10 years after the Trojan War to get home. So the mission, right, quest heroes are always on a mission. His mission, get home. Perseus's, his mission is get the head of Medusa. Jason's mission, go get the golden fleece. Bellerophon, kill the Chimera, this monster that was attacking this town. So they're all quest heroes. They're on a mission, and they successfully accomplish their mission. The literary selections come from Homer's Odyssey, from Book 10 and Book 11 of the Odyssey. In Book 10, he encounters a witch named Circe, whom, with the help of Hermes, he is able to sort of thwart, and then they become lovers for a year, and she becomes a very gracious host. But initially, she's a very bad host because she offers hospitality to some of Odysseus's men and then turns them into swine. Right, so that is not being a good host. You're not being honest with your guests, and you're not treating them right. In Book 11, he takes a trip to the edge of the world, or the underworld. Now, the reason I say that is he sees ghosts, but he doesn't actually travel underground. He doesn't go to the underworld. He goes to the edge of the world where the river Ocean is. And if you remember, early on I said the Greeks imagined of Homer and Hesiod's day, the earth is a disk, above it is the sky, which is a dome, below it is a bowl, which is the underworld. Right? So if you go all the way to the edge is where the upper world and the lower world are really close together, and so that would be presumably where ghosts could seep out easily. Right? That seems to be the idea. But in any, he does travel where no one has gone before, and he does get to see various spirits. And for a hero who's known for his travels, it's an amazing sort of thing. Right, this is the greatest adventure ever. He's gone where no man has ever gone before. The scholarship for this chapter, in a sense, they could have had Prop here because Prop is basically looking at quest heroes. But I think she knew about this article by W.H. Auden, who was a famous British poet in the 20th century, one of the greatest of the English poets in the 20th century. He wrote scholarship as well, and he wrote an article on the quest hero. And there are 6 elements that are mentioned by Auden. And you can see those 6 elements all apply to Odysseus' story. I think they apply to all the quest heroes that we see. It fits pretty well. And one of the things I like about this scheme is it just got 6 parts. So instead of, Props 31, that's a lot of stuff. Or even Raglan's 22, that's a lot of there are a lot of movable parts. Simpler, I think, generally is better, and so the 6 is sort of nice. But Auden claimed that the reason we like quest heroes so much is that we see ourselves in their adventures. In other words, our lives are like an adventure, a travel. And, death is sort of the final destination, but we have various experiences which could be compared to the adventures Odysseus has. I think there's probably some truth to that, but I think the other thing about quest heroes is quest heroes accomplish their quest. So quest heroes, I think part of the reason we like it is we like to see people win, right? I mean, when you go see movies, you often want the good guy, whoever that is, or the good woman, to win, right? Things may look bad, but you want them to win in the end. It becomes more problematic with a movie, say, like Seven, right? Where in a sense the good guys win, but the bad guy also sort of wins because he convinces a cop to, in a sense, go outside the law. That's not really a happy ending. It's not. I think in some ways it troubles us more than it satisfies us. So I think there's more reasons why we like the quest hero. The other literature that we have, sorry about the smallness of the print here, is we've got the Epic of Gilgamesh again and the Aeneid again. So the part from the Epic of Gilgamesh that we have has Gilgamesh traveling to the edge of the world, right? So that's just like Odysseus, to see a guy named Utnapishtim. Now, Utnapishtim is the Mesopotamian Noah. So there was a flood story in Mesopotamia, and Utnapishtim is the survivor of that flood. Because he survived the flood and because he was beloved by the gods, he is given immortality. Gilgamesh has just seen his friend Enkidu die. And Enkidu didn't die heroically in a battle. That would have been okay. I mean, he would have been upset, but that would have been an okay death. He doesn't die that way. He gets sick, he wastes away, and he dies. And Gilgamesh is just amazed. Like, he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't actually even bury the body initially until he sees worms coming out of the skull of Enkidu. So he really, he's stuck for a while before he actually takes any action. And he realizes this is what death is. You basically become diet for worms. And he's like, I don't want that. I'm Gilgamesh, goddammit. I'm gonna, I need to be heroic and live forever. I want to be a god. So he goes to see Utnapishtim to get the secret of immortality. Of course, he fails in that mission. He does get to see Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim cannot give him immortality. He does give him something that will keep him young for a really long time, some sort of plant that will rejuvenate him. But he loses that plant on the journey home. So, the lesson that he learns is you can't, in fact, cheat death. No matter how great you are, how heroic you are, you're still going to die. And that he has to accept that and then live his life as best he can so that people remember him well. I actually find the ending of Gilgamesh actually very satisfying as an ending. The Aeneid in Book 6, Aeneas travels to the Underworld to see his dad, Anchises, who had died earlier in Book 3. In Book 5, they have funeral games in honor of Anchises. And then Aeneas gets a dream that when he gets to Italy, he needs to go, find this cave that will take him down into the Underworld and come and see Anchises' ghost in the Underworld, which he then does. And when he's down there, his father shows him a parade of ghosts of dead Trojans who are going to be reborn as famous Romans. So he gets to basically see the future by looking at the past. So he sees these dead Trojan heroes, but they already look like the Roman heroes they're going to become. And this is a way that Virgil had of writing a poem about the glory of Rome, but setting it at the time of the Trojan War when Rome doesn't even exist. There is no Rome in 1200 BCE. Rome gets founded sometime around 750, so it's several hundred years in the future. This is a way you get to do that. You get a flash forward to Roman history. And so it's an impressive scene. Aeneas demonstrates pietas as his cardinal virtue. Pietas is a Latin word. It does not mean piety, though the English word piety comes from it. It means a sense of duty, knowing what your duty is and then doing that. That is what pietas is. So it's a Roman virtue. It's also sort of an American virtue, right? This is something that we generally valorize people who have a tough job and then do that job, generally without too much complaining. They know they've got a job to do. It may be a messy job, but they do it anyways because it's the right thing to do. So Aeneas demonstrates that. And one of the ways he does that is he actually goes to the underworld, right, which is a horrific thing, to see his dad, right? So shows his filial obligation to his dad. And then by seeing the heroes, he also gets to see why he's doing all the tough stuff that he's doing. He's doing it for this future that isn't yet the case, but won't be the case if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do. So it also demonstrates that. And then sort of to balance what we got in the Nachleben of chapter 11, we get the African-American Odysseus. Now, there's a great quote from Toni Morrison in this section about the nature of the African-American male, especially in the 20th century. That basically the African-American man is a traveler, that he, takes these journeys. He's always on the go. He's really, in a sense, not someone who's comfortable with home, but with traveling. And she says, you're more likely to find African-American men, she's talking about mainly like in the 30s and 40s, as remembering like trains that they rode or trains that they hopped, that they got on, to travel about, than maybe women that they knew in their lives, right? So that becomes sort of a key thing. Now, that is like Odysseus in that Odysseus travels, but the one thing that differentiates African-American men, especially in this time period that Morrison's talking about, and Odysseus, is that he has a home to go to. He is of the privileged class, right? He is an upper class Greek hero, right? He's at the top of the heap as far as like the class level. So he's got something to go home to. That's really what he's all about, getting home. African-American men traditionally have not had homes because economics require that they stay on the go because jobs dry up and opportunities dry up. And there are other things that sort of keep them from sort of putting down roots and settling down. So that's a different sort of thing. And there's a poem here called The Odyssey of Big Boy. Big Boy is the narrator of the poem, and he is basically one of these traveling men. And clearly what Big Boy remembers, he remembers primarily the travel itself and the good times he had with women. He doesn't speak in terms of a person who knows what home is. So there is that difference. It's quite a nice little poem. There's also some pictures from Romar Bearden's illustrations that he did for an illustrated version of the Odyssey, where he recasts Odysseus as an African figure, and so like the island of Circe and the island of Calypso, instead of being Mediterranean islands, they're more like Jamaica and the islands in the Caribbean. Which of course have significance for the Africans in the sense that was a key stopping spot for the slave trade, right? From Africa to the Americas, they would of course stop on those islands. So that's it. We're done for the term as far as these mini lectures go. I hope you've enjoyed the stuff that you've got a chance to read. I apologize for that we don't get whole works, except for the Theogony. We don't get whole works, and that's unfortunate. If you do think of reading the Odyssey in translation, I would heartily recommend Robert Fagel's translation again, because I think Fagel's does the best job in translating Homer into English, because I think he's a very powerful poet and he captures some of that spirit. I think better than any of the other translators. There is a translation by Robert Fitzgerald that's very lyrical, which is nice. There's a new translation by Emily Watson, which got a lot of critical acclaim. Watson is a classics professor, but she's has a strong feminist bent, and she I think really wants to show to the extent that she can, to sort of reveal women in Greek mythology. And the Odyssey, some people claim that the Odyssey may have been composed by, or that there was some input into from a woman. I mean, the usual theory on that is that Homer had a daughter or a granddaughter whom he taught the art of singing songs, and that she composed the Odyssey, because the Odyssey has lots of strong women, and they are not presented as monsters the way that strong women are elsewhere, right? Medea, we may sympathize with her, but she basically is sort of a monstrous figure in Euripides' play. Circe does something horrible to start with, and Calypso keeps Odysseus for 7 years sort of as a prisoner, but both of them are depicted very sympathetically. They are not portrayed as monsters. So that, there's some value to that. And I would agree with, I don't think the Odyssey was composed by the same guy who composed the Iliad. I think they are by two different authors. That said, I think that the nature of ancient singing would require a woman to sing it. But at any rate, I do urge you to look at some translations of the work. The translations I mentioned, those are all good translations that you could look at, and there are some audio books of the Odyssey that you could listen to. The Odyssey is a fun story overall to listen to. It's a lot more fun than the Iliad. The Iliad is sort of intense. I like the Iliad the best, but it is sort of intense, and the battle scene takes up so much of the poem that it's really sort of tough, because it's like each day, like, all these guys are dying, and it just, after a while, you get sort of like, oh man, I don't want to even hear about some other guy dying, and you don't get that in the Odyssey, which is much lighter in its tone. All right, I hope you guys have a good rest of your life, and that you've learned something in the class. This time was well spent. Farewell.